You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Brett Newcomb.
Yes.
So, I think you have...
I'm retiring.
From
everything.
From everything. You've already been
Except
retired.
The enjoyment of life. I'm not retiring from that.
Yeah, you've been retired professionally as a therapist.
I've retired
and
from three different careers, exactly.
But you feel like that it's time to move on from Psych with Mike. We've been doing this.
Leave you to your own devices, nefarious or not.
Well, we've been doing this for, I guess, almost 3 years now.
Oh, it'd be my guess.
And I, to be honest, have been...
I came to you when I was on the rebound. I've been doing a series of podcasts for a number of years with Dr. Maupin, and we finished those, and I was sitting home for a couple of weeks, and my wife was like, "Are you going to do anything?"
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you have hung in there. I will be very honest that I'm surprised that you have stayed with it this long, because I'm
easily distractible.
Yeah, I thought that initially you did that just as a favor to me, and then apparently you did it because you actually enjoyed it, because you wouldn't have done it for 3 years just
both
as a
things
favor.
are true. I did it as a favor to you, and I came to enjoy it, and now I'm not enjoying it at all, so I'm going to quit. Yeah.
Okay. So this won't be your last show. It is May in 2023. You'll go through the end of May. And then I will have to decide
if I have anything to say. I mean, I'll be here, but I may not be speaking cogently, coherently.
There'll be a lot
and people say, well, what the hell's the difference?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of dead air then.
Could be.
Which is good. Yeah. That's good radio.
Could be, yeah.
But I just want to say I couldn't be more thankful for what you've contributed, and I appreciate it greatly. The show is not going to be as good without you, and I know there are going to be a lot of people who are going to also feel that way.
Probably cancel their subscriptions.
They very well may, and that may be an indication where the show should go.
Read those signs.
Yeah. But and actually that's very apropos for my next point, which is for people who do listen to the show, and especially those people who listen to it regularly.
Or for people who want to be on it.
Or for people...
There's a slot open.
There's a slot open.
They can audition.
I would very much like to hear from people...
Assuming that you're open to that.
...what they would like to see the show look like, and if somebody would like to be on the show regularly, I would definitely be willing to have that conversation.
It could help you grow your practice if you're a practicing therapist. I mean, certainly help me grow mine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not?
Well, you were retired. So, in that vein of this announcement, the Surgeon General earlier this week put out a report on loneliness. And what the report said is that the epidemic of loneliness, which we've done a show on, we did a show in November which was titled The Epidemic of Loneliness, which if you're watching this on the YouTubes, I will put a link up in the corner of the screen too, if you're looking for this on the podcast.
So if you didn't get lonely enough from listening to this discussion, you can go back and listen to the previous
other discussion. Yeah.
and be even more lonely.
Okay. But what was amazing to me, everybody always wants to try and analogize things. And so what the Surgeon General's report said is that being lonely is as physically damaging to the human body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
So we know that being lonely is not only a negative psychological state, but it also has very real physiological consequences.
So I was having a conversation with somebody about this very topic earlier this week, and I was at some pains to make a distinction between being lonely and being alone. And I would like to hear your thoughts about that. Do you see a distinction, and how do you identify it?
Oh, I absolutely see a distinction, because I think you can be alone and happy, and you can be lonely in a crowd of 1,000 people. So I think that the distinction is that being alone, you still feel connected to a larger group. You just choose to be alone. Being lonely is when you don't feel a connection, and that can be true either in reality or just perceptually, right? So like you
Right.
could have a very robust group of people in your life, a very robust social
But
network.
if you feel unseen and unconnected, you're just a face in the crowd.
Right. And, when I worked in the locked unit, the mental hospital, the locked mental hospital, that was something that we dealt with all the time. People would come in and they would be despondently depressed to the point of suicidality, and everybody would be coming up in their life when we'd have group sessions, or they'd be coming up for visiting hours and say, don't you see all the people who love you? And the answer is no, they don't see that.
Right.
And telling them that is not a persuasive argument. That isn't
So
what makes
how
them
much
better.
of their loneliness is a matter of obsessive thinking on their part?
Probably 98% of it.
Yeah. So when you work as a therapist with somebody that's complaining of loneliness, and you can challenge that with facts, like, oh yeah, and here's one, and I know these three people that know you. I think it's a better approach to try to break the obsessive thinking and teach them thought stopping, and encourage them to use that and redefine their terminology.
Yeah. One of the things that I tell people in therapy all the time is that you can't be depressed all the time. So if you have somebody who is really genuinely severely depressed to the point of suicidality, who would tell you, I am depressed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I would respectfully say to that person, that's not true. And here's how I know that is because some of the time during the day you sleep. You cannot physiologically be depressed while you're asleep. That can't be true. And so
I don't know that. How do you know that?
Because your brain operates differently when you're asleep. Now, you may work through the issues of depression in
No, I'm not trying to be
dream
smart ass.
states.
I'm truly
No.
curious how you can make that statement.
Because your brain works differently when you're depressed, and it changes physiologically the makeup of your body.
Okay.
And so the brainwave patterns, so there are 5 main brainwave patterns, and this isn't a show on brainwave patterns, but the way that your brain doesn't enter into the same kind of brainwave patterns when you're asleep as it does when you're depressed. And so you may work through some of the issues of your depression in a dream state, which very much could happen, but that wouldn't be the same as being physiologically depressed. And also what happens is that the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which is a part of the physiological state of being depressed, isn't active when you're asleep. Your sympathetic nervous system.
So you're telling me that I can have a dream about loneliness
Yes.
and depression,
Yes.
but that physiological monitoring would show my body in a condition that's different from when I'm awake and thinking or feeling lonely and depressed.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I did not know that.
So during that period of time, you're not depressed.
Yeah.
And when people do studies on this all the time, and when you're awake, you're actually, even if you are the most depressed person in the world, you're probably only depressed physiologically about 25% of the time. So people perceive, just like you said, it's an obsessive thinking issue. They perceive that they are depressed always, which isn't actually true. And so if you can tell a person that, if they can buy into that, if they can accept that, that can be a tremendously powerful tool.
So you're talking to somebody, client, and they say, I'm so depressed, I can't get out of bed. I can't take a shower. I can't do the dishes. I'm sitting in a mess. I look around and say, oh my God, what a mess, but I can't do anything about it.
Right.
How do you respond?
Well, you encourage them to make a commitment to taking a single action. Will you commit to me that between today that we are seeing each other and the next time we see each other, whether that's 3 days from now, a week from now, if you're seeing somebody who is significantly depressed, even to the point of suicidality, I would encourage you to see that person more than once a week.
Right.
But at least once a week. Don't let them drag it out to every 3 weeks. But between today, when we are seeing each other, and the next time we see each other, will you make a commitment to me that you will brush your teeth at least once a day, every day, and actually record that so that you can bring that back and we can talk about it.
Write it down as a checklist and then mark it off when they've accomplished it.
Yeah.
Write down the time, or just mark that they did it?
No, in the beginning, write down the time and maybe even how long you did it. Yeah. I brushed my teeth for 30 seconds. Okay. Then the next day I brushed my teeth for a minute and a half. Okay. Well, that's improvement, So the Surgeon General recommends that we brush our teeth for 2 minutes a day. Or brush our teeth.
Surgeon General really has a lot of.
He's got a lot to say.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So when you work with somebody on thought stopping, teaching them the skill of thought stopping, when they're obsessing about, oh my God, I'm so lonely, I'm tired and lonely, whatever the song is. How do you do that? Do you find a replacement thought to try to go to, like a meditation experience, whatever is like. One for me is sitting on top of a mountain, looking out over a valley, watching the birds fly beneath me, and seeing the valley in the distance. That's always been a relaxing, satisfying, calming, awe-inspiring experience for me. So if I were trying to teach myself thought stopping, and I knew that about me, I would say, when you start to obsess about these things, let's do a 1, 2, 3 count, or whatever we need to do to cognitively, consciously tell you, change your thinking. Think about this instead of that. Go to this place instead of that place. And try to hold it for 30 seconds.
So thought stopping is a technique in the cognitive behavioral vein of psychology, which we're going to do a show before you leave on the difference between cognitive behavioral therapy and psychodynamic therapy.
Are we going to think about it?
Will it be probably not. We haven't thought about it. But the point being that we'll get even more into this when we do that, because
we don't want to drift away from this.
The process of thought stopping is it's a progression. It's a journey. It's not so.
Well, but in some ways, it's like if you have another player, it's like, here, chase this rabbit.
Yeah.
Because if I can get you to chase that rabbit, you're not chasing this one.
But my point is that, if you're doing cognitive behavior therapy with somebody and you say, hey, I'm going to give you a replacement thought, you've jumped the shark. That's stage 10, and you got to start at stage 1.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to talk about. Can we do a show on that?
Eventually.
Okay.
So the first thing you got to do is stop the thought, and then eventually you want to try and replace the thought. But the first thing is to stop the thought. And what I tell people is to stop a thought, you need a distraction technique.
Like taking a rubber band and pop it?
Yeah. That could work. But the distraction technique has to be at least equal in emotional value to whatever the thought is.
Oh, you tell me that and I'm depressed and I'm obsessing about my depression, I'm going to look at you and say, BS.
Right. And
how do you expect me to do that?
So here, I'm going to teach you how to do it.
Oh, okay.
But so what happens is that, if I say to somebody, you got to find a distraction technique, and they say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to pop that rubber band. Well, popping the rubber band might be perfectly fine for, anxiety that you feel over your wife not putting the lid on the toothpaste. But it may not be equal to the challenge of I'm horribly, horribly depressed. So what I tell people is, let's try and find something in your mind that is so weighty that it would be able to counter any thought that we can imagine. So for you, just like you said, this process of sitting on a mountaintop, which you and I have done, and watched birds fly underneath us, and that is that is the most Zen thing that you can ever think of. That's what I then want you to use, and I want you to use it all the time. So I don't want you to have to sit and think, oh, this thought, this depression is a 7. I need a thought stopping technique that's a 7. No, find the most incredibly emotionally fulfilling thought that you can imagine, and then use that. So for me, it was the humming of Luke's theme from Star Wars, because that takes me back to being in a theater in 1977.
You are so strange.
Yeah. but it works. That's what worked for me.
Yeah.
So whatever
Which is
it
the
is,
point.
Yeah.
Find what works for the
Find what
individual.
works for you.
Right.
So for you, it's the image of being on a mountaintop. For me, it's humming Luke's theme from Star Wars. And for somebody listening to this, it's going to be something else. But as a therapist, you have to help that person find something that is going to be emotionally impactful enough that it's going to be able to counter the thought. Otherwise, you won't stop it.
Well, so one of the differences in the way that we work is you want to explain conceptually all of that to the person that's suppressed.
Yes.
And I don't disagree with your thought process. I don't disagree with your procedure, but I wouldn't waste the time giving that explanation. I would just start trying to make baby steps. Can we do it for 20 seconds? Can we do it while we're having this conversation? Can we do it? Can we give you something to take with you? My ink pen. So if you start to feel these things, you can pick this up and it will transport you back to this conversation and you think about whatever. I tried to do it without explaining what I'm doing. I need to know conceptually in my head what the hell I think I'm doing and why, and be able to explain it clinically to someone outside the loop. But with a client, I don't feel the need to do that. I don't think it's a productive use of my time as a general behavior.
So let's go to our break, and when we come back, we'll pick this up on the other side.
All right.
Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them to listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. When we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and I hear exactly what you're saying. I don't disagree with it at all, but I also think that...
But like Popeye, you have to say, I am what I am.
Exactly.
It's the way I do it.
As a therapist, you have to be genuine and sincere. So that's the way I do it. It's not the way you do it. And there's some people in the world that think like me, that like the way that I do it. And there are a lot of people in the world that think like you, that like the way you're doing it. So that's one of the things that...
I have actually spoken to people that have seen you clinically as their therapist, who say you do a marvelous job and they feel real good about the work. I've spoken to a couple of others that wouldn't go back to you, but not very many.
But that's the way it is with everything. And I tell people all the time, and I think you've said this too, come and sit with me for an hour.
Regularly I would say that.
And if I'm your cup of tea, great. And if I'm not, that's okay. It doesn't insult me. You're not infringing on my ego.
I would say come twice. And if we spend 2 sessions together and you don't ever come back, no harm, no foul. But if you come back, pay me.
Well, I would even go so far as to say, if you go to somebody's office and short of it being a genuinely traumatic experience, which sometimes it can be, then you should give that person at least 3 sessions. I think that that's...
I wouldn't disagree.
Because I think that it is, and we're going to do another show on the best ways to use your therapy hour, and one of the things that is true about a lot of people is that they've never been to therapy, or they are very shy, they're very introverted, and I think you need to have at least those 3 sessions to get out of your comfort zone enough to see if you think that therapy is productive.
So we talk about the conceptualization of loneliness and being lonely. And we've talked about some of the therapeutic approaches or understandings for trying to treat individuals who suffer from this issue. And then we also have this article from Psychology Today that offers some specific suggestions for combating loneliness in your life. So I think we should at least spend a minute or two running through some of those.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. And let's caveat that by saying this is not any different from what we said last November. It's not any different from what was in the Surgeon General's report. These are just basic, good Psychology 101 ideas for helping people to combat loneliness. But nothing can replace the individual doing the work. I can't make you not
Well,
be
it goes
lonely.
back to I can put you in a crowd of people.
Right.
I can surround you with human beings, but you'll still be lonely if you don't find a way to stop the obsessive nature. And part of the obsession is justifying why you're lonely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody loves me. I think I'll go eat worms.
Right.
What the hell's wrong with me? I'm a bad person. I'm not lovable because A, B, and C I've done or haven't done. It's just such a vociferous energy consumer,
right,
when you spend your time thinking about those things. Plus, it buys into scripts that were written for you by other people, right, about guilt and shame.
And one of the things that I would say at this juncture is, I know that for you, for me also, but for you specifically, the victim script is something that you really kind of bristle at.
The words that you hear in your head matter.
Yeah.
More than I can stress.
Yeah.
And if you hear people telling you you're too stupid, or you're the reason why we got a divorce, or you're the reason why I'm broke, or whatever it is, blaming other people, or having other people blame you for issues in their lives or failings in your own, help you feed into basically an excuse for not functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why should I try? I remember we used to, when I was training to be a classroom teacher at the high school level, there were discussions in those classes about, should kids be told what their IQ is?
Yeah, yeah.
And the argument was no, they shouldn't. They should be given a range, not a number, because they will use the number as either a rationale for not trying. Well, yeah, I'm a genius. I got a 160 IQ. Why should I study for this math test? Or they'll use it as an excuse for not trying because I'm so dumb. I have a 90 IQ, so I can't take a foreign language because I couldn't pass it.
Right.
And so they don't try.
Right.
And if you don't give them that number, if you give them a range, well, you're in the middle range, or you're in the upper range, or you're at the top of the middle, or something like that, then there's an encouragement to perform at their best.
Right.
That becomes possible.
Yeah. So the individual...
Sorry, did I distract you?
No.
Oh.
I was thinking about how I wanted to say this. So the individual has to do the work.
Yeah.
And if you're going to confront your own victim script, you have to do the work. But going back to the list in the article, the first one is to reconnect with old friends. So I can tell you that. I can, as your therapist, I can say, hey, why don't you reconnect with old friends?
Yeah, but if you call, nobody answers.
Or if you say, oh, my phone's on the fritz, or, you'll find a million different reasons. That's why I'm saying you have to do the work.
Yeah.
I can't do the work for you. I can give you a suggestion. I can even try and hold you accountable, but I can't physically do the work.
Right. They have to do it. So reconnect with old friends. You have to make the physical effort to try to do that. And the second one, I think, is my rejection doesn't happen as often as we expect it to. That reminds my favorite Albert Ellis story. Albert Ellis, who did reality therapy as a school of training and thought.
Okay, so technically, reality therapy is Glasser, but so Albert Ellis did rational emotive behavior therapy.
Okay, thank you for that reminder.
Yeah. But William Glazer's reality therapy is very much based on Albert Ellis's work.
Right. The story that I was going to tell, though, was a person said to Albert Ellis, I can't get a date. Women won't go out with me. And so he gave him an assignment to stand on a busy street corner in New York City at the busiest rush hour of the day and ask the first 100 women that walked by, will you go out with me? And to keep track of the answers. And he said, now sometimes you may get your face slapped, you may get yelled at, you may get laughed at, people may say no to you, but
somebody
not all
might
of
call
them.
the cops.
But some of them will say, well, not only that, do you want to have sex?
Right.
And so that was an experiment he had people do.
Yeah.
To challenge their conviction, talk about thought stopping, that they were not capable of achieving a social interaction with somebody.
Right.
Or of having friends.
And just being able to entertain the possibility that you may not get rejected 100% of the time is in and of itself
Huge
progress.
step. Yes, absolutely. And you got math to prove it. And you got 100 people you asked, you got 5 people said yes. Now, what we focus on, you and I know this from years of giving speeches and presentations, when we get evaluations back after the speech, how did this go? There are going to be like 3 categories of responses. There are going to be those laudatory ones of, oh my God, you're an impressive speaker, and I learned so much, and where are you speaking again? I'll go to the ends of the earth. You're going to get some of those. You're going to get some that say, the room was cold, the chair was hot, the guy in front of me smelled bad, and have nothing to do with your speech. And then you're getting some that say, I don't like the way you talk, you sound like a hick, you said things that were stupid. Those are the ones we see.
Right.
Those are the ones we hear and carry with us. I get 500 responses. I get 10 that are negative like that. Those are the ones I obsess about.
Yeah. And I would even argue that, 500 responses, and you get 1 or 2 that are like that. And those are the ones that you focus on. And,
and
we would
like, this always happens. Well, you got 498 that didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And you and I would like to think of ourselves as fairly well
balanced,
psychologically adjusted,
well loved. Yeah.
And yet we know that has been our experience.
Well, I know it's true for me.
So how much more profound is that for somebody who already believes themselves to be horribly, horribly depressed, right? And I think
we're probably talking about somebody that's anxious too at that point. Yeah.
So tip number 3 is expect to feel a little awkward, which I think is super important. So, the fear of rejection is what keeps most of us from taking action to begin with. But then if we get coached up and we're on fire for God and we're going to go out and we're going to change the world, then the idea of picking up the phone and making that call feels out of our comfort zone.
George Goebel, the famous in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, comedian, was on the Tonight Show one night with a group of lustrous stars, Bob Hope and Dean Martin and somebody else. And he cracked everybody up because he looked around and said, I feel like a pair of old brown shoes in a room full of tuxedos. So if you think you have that's where you are, who would like you, the way you look, the way you dress, those kind of things.
Well, and the issue with that is that most of what a depressed person experiences is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's also a reflection of feedback, Mike. I remember being in a speech class in the 8th grade, and the speech teacher, Mrs. Grimes, who I adored, old lady, but really good at her job, when she was having us practice coming out on a stage, getting ready to take a podium, sit down, how to sit with your knees together, your feet crossed at the ankle or flat on the floor, that kind of thing. Don't sprawl in the chair. Don't cross your leg over your knee. Those kind of things. And I was uncomfortable. And she asked me, "Why are you uncomfortable?" And I said, "I'm embarrassed by my shoes." I had big old brogans. I was a poor kid from the poor part of town, and I was in a classroom full of kids from the rich part of town. And they were all wearing high-dollar outfits, and I was in blue jeans and brogans. And I said that. And she really helped me get past that by saying, this is a speech class. You're one of the best speakers in the room. We're going to be mesmerized by what you have to say. We're not going to be looking at your shoes. But whether you're wearing these shoes or other shoes, you have to learn how to sit properly.
Right.
So put your feet flat on the floor and put your knees together.
And so then, why do you think that was transformative? I would argue that it was that you believed in. If she would have been a different teacher, somebody that you particularly maybe didn't like, I don't know that would have had as much impact.
Oh, I don't think it would have. I wouldn't have had an impact at all. I would have discounted it. No, I believed it mainly because she gave me something to hold on to that I held on to for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm still holding on to it. Yeah. I'm an impressive public speaker. When I want to be, I can move the crowd. That's a skill set that I have. I like that about me, and it's made me a lot of money through the years. I learned in 8th grade that she thought I had that ability, and that was more important than the way I looked in the moment, because those looks change. I mean, you're in 8th grade, you come back in the 12th grade, you come back a 75-year-old man, you look different. You're still not wearing the same pair of shoes. So there were lessons there that just However, as a good teacher, she found a way to make me embrace it and be energized by it, which I saw her do with other students as well, and that's what good teachers do.
Yeah.
She was there for me, and it was critical in my life.
And we do this for both the layperson listening to it who maybe gets some psychological information out of it, but also for people
teachers
who are practitioners
Yeah.
and teachers. And that's the point that I want to make, is that, the power that Mrs. Grimes had was your faith in her. The power that you have as a therapist is the client's faith in you. And that's a very, very powerful tool. And that's why not every therapist is for every client. I knew a gal when I was working at the rehabilitation center, and she is a really mousy gal. And we were doing substance abuse treatment with people who a lot of times had either been incarcerated or were coming out of incarceration. And she wasn't a very good therapist for those guys, because they looked at her and said, "Who are you?" Yeah. But there were some women, nurses or even housewives, who were coming through that program that, they were just so scared and intimidated by the surroundings. And she was a phenomenal therapist for those women. And so all of us have a role that we can fill, and that's your power as a therapist, is the client's belief in you. And if the client doesn't have that, it's going to be really hard to get movement.
As a therapist and as a teacher, those are overlapping performance skills.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book I would recommend to the audience called Shakespeare Saved My Life. And so, quick read, but it was written by a man on death row. And he tells the story of this young English teacher who came into death row to volunteer to teach literature to death row convicts, and all the safety precautions around. And she was a shy little thing, but she really wanted to do this. And she taught these convicts, and they go through the physical safety procedures. I mean, sitting in a cell where he couldn't see her, but he could hear her because she was sitting off to the side. It was kind of like Hannibal Lecter and Jodie Foster.
Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. He said she taught these guys to read quality literature, especially Shakespeare. And then when the money for the grant that she had ran out and she couldn't come back to the prison anymore, he took over teaching the class. And then it became an ongoing program. And so the book is called Shakespeare Saved My Life. So I would recommend it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap this up for today. Again, just to summarize, I want to say to you how meaningful that this time with us together has been. We got a couple more shows that we're going to do, but when we get closer to the end, I'm probably going to be even more emotional than I am right now. But I just wanted to say to you specifically and genuinely and sincerely, thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've done and what you've contributed. And obviously you and I will remain friends, and maybe even you'll decide that this is something that you miss and you'll make some guest appearances. I don't know. That's just something that I think about. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you've done.
You're very welcome.
The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. If you want to get on the Psych with Mike train before the end of Brett's tenure, you can find us on the YouTubes at Psych with Mike and subscribe to the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and a review, and that helps other people find the show, which we greatly appreciate.
You don't have to worry about being addictive, because 3 of anything is not an addiction.
There you go. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.